I'm Ian Campbell from New Zealand. It's 4 p.m. here on Saturday, so it's this is quite easy for us, whereas it's getting very late for a lot of you. I'd just like to introduce the next speaker, Julian McGarry. I've known Julian for a few years. He's the president of
Ted Brown.
He's the president of ANZURA, which is the Australia and New Zealand Urantia Association, and has been a serious student of the Urantia book since 2004. Julian is a clinical psychologist in private practice, lives in Hobart, Tasmania, with his wife Trish and two sons, James and Hugh. Julian is committed to proclaiming the gospel of Jesus through the medium of interfaith dialogue and outreach. His theme for us today is fear not, because that was Jesus' watchword. Take it away, Julian.
Thank you, Ian. And welcome, everyone. I just want to make sure you can all hear me okay. If you can, nod your heads. This is all kind of very new for me. I think it's wonderful that we have this technology available to us. Particularly in the context of what's happening worldwide now, the coronavirus, which prohibits us from gathering together as we normally do. So this is truly a wonderful innovation. I thank you, Chris, and I thank the Urantia Association for making this possible at such short notice today, and for inviting me to be part of this 24-hour conference. As I said, this is kind of new for me, doing it on this medium. I'm used to addressing people, in a live audience that as in face-to-face, but this is quite new. So if I stumble a few times, please forgive me. What I propose to do today is show you a PowerPoint presentation. So I'd like you to follow along with me as I present to you some truly inspiring quotes from the Urantia book. I'm not sure how long it's going to take. I know I've only got 50 minutes approximately, so if I've got too many slides, I might be rushing through them towards the end. But I'm hoping also to leave time for any questions you might have or comments you might want to make on this theme. The theme is fear not. When I was invited to present on this conference, it came to my mind straight away, given the state of the world at the moment. It's a theme I like to deliver to my individual gospel group that I'm part of, because I discern that people in the group were fearful, given the rapidity of change on the planet at the moment. Indeed, people are afraid. I think you see that everywhere. It manifests in different ways. We see it in the shopping centres. The look on people's faces, people look very serious, and that it often escalates into panic buying, people wrestling over scarce commodities. The streets seem deserted, and there's constant 24/7 news around the world of what's happening with this virus. So, the world is in the grip of fear. But people are afraid of lots of other things as well on top of this. As a clinical psychologist, I'm aware that my clients present with so many things that they're afraid of. Obviously, coronavirus is the latest thing, but only very recently, here in Australia particularly, we were seeing the ravages of climate change. Perhaps in other parts of the world, you may have seen headlines in Australia of wildfires, absolutely devastating fires. It almost appeared as if the whole of the eastern coast of Australia was on fire. The country was also breaking temperature records left, right and centre. Unprecedented temperatures in the capital cities of Australia. This inspired enormous fear in people. What is happening to our planet? And what's the planet going to be like for our children and our grandchildren? These questions haunt people and lead to real anxiety and stress. Other things that make people afraid, things that we're probably all familiar with, The fear of being socially rejected or ostracized is a real fear for some people. The fear of pain, experiencing pain, whether it be physical or emotional, is a real fear for many of my clients. The fear of sickness, obviously the coronavirus, but many other sicknesses haunts people. Or being homeless. Thankfully, most of us here today haven't experienced homelessness, but many people do, in increasing numbers in our capital cities. The fear of violence haunts many people, particularly if you're living in a war zone or living in a city which appears to be like a war zone. Violence is a true problem. For a huge chunk of the world's population, starvation is something to be feared. Even though we're making inroads on poverty, for many people, starvation is a daily reality. And then we progress on to fears of natural disasters, so-called acts of nature, earthquakes, volcanoes, cyclones or hurricanes, floods, drought, famine and plagues. These are things we've experienced in Australia recently, widespread drought, only to be interrupted by floods. It's an extraordinary contrast in a country like Australia where you get floods and drought almost side by side. The fear of losing a loved one in death can really trouble people. And I've had many people come to me with grief issues, fear of the impending death of a loved one or the death of a loved one. For many people, just the thought of becoming a failure, being a failure in whatever they're pursuing in life, whether it be a failure in their schoolwork, university studies, or a failure in their career, is something to be feared. Just getting old can make us frightened. The frailties of old age can be really frightening. Losing your job is something that people fear, and that's certainly happening here in Australia, and I'm sure in other parts of the world. As a result of this coronavirus, many businesses are going to the wall, and this means widespread unemployment. People are very scared about how they're going to survive. This links in with financial hardship. How are we going to pay our bills? How are we going to pay our mortgages? That produces fear. For many people, prejudice and discrimination are sources of fear, particularly if you belong in a minority group that is marginalised in society. That can be an ongoing daily fear. Finally, the fear of wars is something that some people live with day by day in certain parts of the world. War is an ongoing problem and something they have to live with. At times like this, people are frightened of what we might call end-of-world scenarios. You see them all the time on social media. People expressing fears about this is the end of the world, the end of the human race, this is God's punishment upon us. We're getting our just desserts, whatever. This can produce enormous amounts of fear in people, particularly the ignorant. The Bible itself says at Hebrews 2:15 that the fear of death can subject us to lifelong slavery. That is the common denominator that we all face, this fear of death, and it can lead to behaviours which are unhealthy and dangerous. I'm going to now try sharing my PowerPoint presentation. I hope you can all see that. Let me know if you can't. There's the subject, fear not. Those two words were really the byword or catchword that Jesus used again and again in his ministry. So what does the fifth ethical revelation have to say about fear? A huge amount. It was difficult actually finding quotes that were perhaps most relevant. There's so much to say about fear in the book. Here's the first appropriate quote. Few persons live up to the faith which they really have. Unreasoned fear is a master intellectual fraud practiced upon the evolving mortal soul. The comment I'd like to make about this quote is that it specifically is referring to what's called unreasoned fear. It's saying unreasoned fear is a fraud. Now, not all fear, we can say, is unreasoned. Some fear is perfectly reasonable and even appropriate. For most of us, for example, encountering a poisonous snake or spider provokes some sort of fear. Indeed, we may fear contracting the coronavirus, so we implement sensible health measures. This is useful because it leads us to act in a way that keeps us alive. It has survival value. But what does the book mean when it talks about unreasoned fear? What's that all about? Fear is man's chief enslaver, and pride his great weakness. Will you betray yourself into bondage to both of these destroyers of joy and liberty? And so we hear in this quote that it is our bondage to fear that enslaves us, not just fear itself. Fear, as we'll soon learn, has some value for our survival, but when we become in bondage to it, when we become enslaved to it, then it creates real problems. When fear captures our hearts and our minds, it robs us of joy and liberty. A simple example I can give as a clinical psychologist, clients who come to me with a disorder called agoraphobia, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. The fear of being in public places, the fear of losing control in public places. It's a real fear and it can be extreme. I've had cases of people who will literally not step outside of their homes. The fear of having a panic attack or confronting people and not knowing what to do. There's an example of somebody becoming enslaved or in bondage to a fear. And of course, it destroys any sense of joy and liberty they might have to be confined to your home for the rest of your life. All physical poisons greatly retard the efforts of the adjuster to exalt the material mind, while the mental poisons of fear, anger, envy, jealousy, suspicion, and intolerance likewise tremendously interfere with the spiritual progress of the evolving soul. The fear is here referred to as a mental poison. It literally poisons our mind. It tremendously interferes with our spiritual progress. And yet, as we're about to learn, fear has been responsible for our very survival, even our civilization. Urantia civilization was literally forged out between the anvil of necessity and the hammers of fear. Primitive society was thus founded on the reciprocity of necessity and on the enhanced safety of association. And human society has evolved in age-long cycles as a result of this isolation fear and by means of reluctant cooperation. Indeed, we are gregarious by nature. We are wired to need one another. Indeed, loneliness is something that people really fear. Being isolated threatens our very survival. It is certainly detrimental to our psychological and emotional well-being. And so society was born not of mere association of numbers, but rather as a result of the organisation of intelligent cooperators. But cooperation is not a natural trait of man. He learns to cooperate first through fear, and then later, because he discovers it is most beneficial in meeting the difficulties of time and guarding against the supposed perils of eternity. So it's interesting that the book states that the fear and dread of isolation has forced us to cooperate with one another. We coalesce, we come together to cooperate, even though it may be a fearful thing in itself. We realise to be on our own certainly compromises our survival. I guess with the coronavirus, we're seeing examples of that before our very eyes. It seems that it takes a crisis as massive as this that in order to bring the world together. We're seeing perhaps unprecedented examples of international cooperation to fight this virus, probably orchestrated mainly by the United Nations. But it's really fascinating to watch this. It may be of interest to contrast this to the response to climate change. There's been lots of urgings that we approach this problem from a worldwide international perspective, but that hasn't been that successful. Most nations choose to do their own thing because climate change is one of those kind of slow creeping things that perhaps people put out of their minds and perhaps the need for economic progress overshadows that fear. But not so with coronavirus. It's such an immediate problem and it's so pervasive now that it seems that humans reluctantly are coming together to cooperate and to fight this common enemy. Evolutionary religion is born of a simple and all-powerful fear, the fear which surges through the human mind when confronted with the unknown, the inexplicable, and the incomprehensible. This really is human nature, isn't it? We tend to fear what we don't know or what we perceive as being different. In a way, this is what really fuels things like racism and prejudice. It's the fear of the unknown, fear of something that is strange, alien, or different that gives rise to prejudice and rejection of certain groups in our society. However, there is an effective antidote to that surging fear, that amazing metaphor of fear surging through our bodies. Religion eventually achieves the profoundly simple realization of an all-powerful love, the love which sweeps irresistibly through the human soul when awakened to the conception of the limitless affection of the universal Father for the sons of the universe. Our fear, the fear that may surge through our bodies, is replaced with love when we realize that the universal Father loves us as his dear sons and daughters. Religion as a human experience ranges from the primitive fear slavery of the evolving savage up to the sublime and magnificent faith liberty of those civilized mortals who are superbly conscious of sonship with the eternal God. The Urantia book in amazing detail describes how primitive religion was based on fear. Fear has always been the driving force in the early manifestations of religion. Fear of the unknown, fear of natural forces, thunderstorms, wind, hail, and so forth, fear of ghosts, fear of those who died. However, it ultimately evolves to sublime and magnificent faith liberty on love and sonship with God. The thought adjusters would like to change your feelings of fear to convictions of love and confidence. But they cannot mechanically and arbitrarily do such things. That is your task. In executing those decisions which deliver you from the fetters of fear, you literally supply the psychic fulcrum on which the adjuster may subsequently apply a spiritual lever of uplifting and advancing illumination. When we swap fear for love through our conscious decision making and the positive choices we make, our thought adjusters, our friends who live inside us, the literal fragments of God are enabled to spiritually uplift and illuminate us. We now come to the theme of this presentation, which is really the words of Jesus. A lot of what I've got to say today is based on his words. He, that is Jesus, placed great value upon sincerity, a pure heart. Fidelity was a cardinal virtue in his estimate of character, while courage was the very heart of his teachings. Fear not was his watchword, and patient endurance his ideal of strength of character. Jesus came to liberate us from fear, hence the words, fear not. He realized that fear was a real problem for us mortals. Because he shared our nature, he knew that humans were naturally prone to be fearful. Fear has been useful in our evolution, but now it needs to be replaced with a higher motivation. I'm sure you're familiar with this passage. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And yet when these birds flit about in quest of their sustenance, not one of them exists without the knowledge of the Father, the source of all life. To the seraphic guardians, the very hairs of your head are numbered. And if all of this is true, why should you live in fear of the many trifles which come up in your daily lives? I say to you, fear not, you are of much more value than many sparrows. I wonder if we really grasp the simplicity and the profundity of this lesson that Jesus draws from nature. It's beautifully stated. And it's true, isn't it, that often our fears are the result of making a mountain out of a molehill. Often our fears are about trivial life things, an ego mind that is out of control, that simply jumps from one source of annoyance or some little small concern to another, and we get swept up in it. Now Jesus addresses bigger issues, not just the small trivial things of life, but major events that can take place on our planet. I'll read this to you. Jesus portrayed the profound surety of the God-knowing mortal when he said, to a God-knowing kingdom believer, what does it matter if all things earthly crash? Temporal securities are vulnerable, but spiritual sureties are impregnable. When the flood tides of human adversity, selfishness, cruelty, hate, malice, and jealousy beat about the mortal soul, you may rest in the assurance that there is one inner bastion, the citadel of the spirit, which is absolutely unassailable. At least this is true of every human being who has dedicated the keeping of his soul to the indwelling spirit of the eternal God. So doesn't it appear right now, surely as we look on the news, that all things earthly are crashing? Couldn't this be said to be one of the things Jesus would be referring to when we look on our monitors, on our screens, and see all things coming apart, confusion, panic, unheard of things happening? So where do we turn then for our security in the midst of these situations? Jesus talks about the citadel of the Spirit. After such spiritual attainment, whether secured By gradual growth or specific crisis, there occurs a new orientation of personality, as well as the development of a new standard of values. Such spirit-born individuals are so remotivated in life that they can calmly stand by while their fondest ambitions perish and their keenest hopes crash. They positively know that such catastrophes are but the redirecting cataclysms which wreck one's temporal creations. Sorry, I'll go to the next one. I'll read that again for you. They positively know that such catastrophes are but the redirecting cataclysms which wreck one's temporal creations, preliminary to the rearing of the more noble and enduring realities of a new and more sublime level of universe attainment. Have we developed this new standard of values? How do we feel when our fondest ambitions perish and our keenest hopes crash? Do we recognise and discern the silver lining? Remember, the book says, the apparent cruelty of a perverse fate that heaps tribulation upon some suffering mortal may in reality be the tempering fire that is transmuting the soft iron of immature personality into the tempered steel of real character. This is a remarkable thought. We all experience our own personal trials, and at times it appears that our life is falling apart. The things that we put our trust in seem to crumble, and we may complain, we may fret, and we may weep about what's happening. And yet we're told that these very things may be what enables us to grow spiritually, to develop character that is able to endure true tests, the tests that still lie before us. Like the apostles, we really need to be reminded all the time that we are children of God. Isn't this really the good news that the world needs, that we are children of God? This is what Jesus said to Thomas, and even you, Thomas, failed to comprehend what I've been saying. Have I not all this time taught you that your connection with the kingdom is spiritual and individual, and individually wholly a matter of personal experience in the spirit, the faith realization that you're a son of God? What more shall I say? The downfall of nations, the crash of empires, the destruction of the unbelieving Jews, the end of an age, even the end of the world. What are these things to do with one who believes this gospel and who has hid his life in the surety of the eternal kingdom? You who are God-knowing and God-believing have already received the assurances of eternal life. Since your lives have been lived in the Spirit and for the Father, nothing can be of serious concern to you. Kingdom builders, the accredited citizens of the heavenly worlds, are not to be disturbed by temporal upheavals or perturbed by terrestrial cataclysms. What does it matter to you who believe this gospel of the kingdom if nations overturn, the age ends, or all things visible crash, since you know that your life is the gift of the Son and that it is eternally secure in the Father? I mean, these are really, really powerful words said to the apostles not long before Jesus was arrested. And they certainly apply to us today. We see amazing things happening day by day on our planet. Terrestrial cataclysms. But Jesus says, but what's that to you? Why should that concern you? You who believe in the gospel, you who are now sons of God, if we claim to have faith in God's promises, to be gospel believing, then nothing of this world can disturb us. So we understand what it means to believe in this gospel of the kingdom. We have already been given the gift of eternal life, secure in the Father. It's an amazing concept. We've already been given eternal life. Therefore, why should we fear what we see befalling our planet? Having started out on the way of life everlasting, having accepted the assignment and received your orders to advance, do not fear the dangers of human forgetfulness and mortal inconstancy. Do not be troubled with doubts of failure or by perplexing confusion. Do not falter and question your status and standing, for in every dark hour, at every crossroad, in the forward struggle, the Spirit of truth will always speak, saying, "This is the way." So even in the midst of worldwide panic and confusion, the Spirit of truth, the Spirit of the Father and the Spirit of the Son, Jesus himself, will always show us the way forward. It is a solemn and supernal fact that such lowly and material creatures as Urantia human beings are the sons of God, faith children of the highest. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. While it does not yet appear what you shall be, even now you are the faith sons of God. For you have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you have received the spirit of sonship, whereby you cry, "Our Father." I'm just thinking I may have missed a little part of that quote. Yes, as many, I'm just highlighting the point there, as many as received him, to them gave he the power to recognize that they are the sons of God. I think it's important to note that our Father has given us the power to recognize that we are sons and daughters of himself, our sonship. That power is really our faith. It's our faith that gives us that power. It is our faith that will prevent us from succumbing again to the bondage of fear that may surround us. And throughout every trial and in the presence of every hardship, spirit-born souls are sustained by that hope which transcends all fear, because the love of God is shed abroad in all hearts by the presence of the divine Spirit. Your sonship is grounded in faith. You are to remain unmoved by fear. Your joy is born of trust in the divine word. You shall not therefore be led to doubt the reality of the Father's love and mercy. And if you are the children of this living faith, you are no longer the bond slaves of self, but rather the triumphant masters of yourselves, the liberated sons of God. What magnificent quotes these are. How encouraging, how inspiring. Here we have the cause and effect. Sonship, grounded in faith, enables us to remain unmoved by fear. As simple as that. Our faith enables us to be courageous and fearless. I'm sorry, I should have put that on. I'll just read that again. And if you are the children of this living faith, you are no longer the bond slaves of self, but rather the triumphant masters of yourselves, the liberated sons of God. The issues of life and death are being set before you. The sinful pleasures of time against the righteous realities of eternity. Even now you should begin to find deliverance from the bondage of fear and doubt as you enter upon the living of the new life of faith and hope. And when the feelings of service for your fellow men arise within your soul, do not stifle them. When the emotions of love for your neighbour well up within your heart, give expression to such urges of affection in intelligent ministry to the real needs of your fellows. This is the sum and substance of the religion of Jesus. This ministry is the ministry of the gospel of Jesus. I think it's beautiful and powerful when Jesus is saying that when you have these feelings of service for your fellow man, don't stifle them. Faith sons and daughters of God need to stand out as beacons of light and hope. If we're crippled by fear, if we're in bondage to fear, then how can we be promoting, how can we be ambassadors for the kingdom? When people see us, they need to see calm, they need to see peace, they need to see hope, they need to see warmth. So we can go and provide hope to those around us, both emotionally and in material ways. You can give expression to such urges of affection and intelligent ministry to the real needs of your fellows. The book makes it very plain, I haven't got time to talk about it today, but it makes it very plain that this ministry of the gospel of Jesus will ultimately bring true unity to the nations of the world. And perhaps this catastrophe that we're going through now may lead into more and more of this happening. I'm seeing more and more comments on social media, indeed on the mainstream media, give you examples of people expressing kindness and love and unselfishness towards one another, encouraging one another, shopping for one another, visiting one another, and it's being portrayed as the way we need to start behaving as a human race. And that has all the hallmarks of the religion of Jesus. I keep forgetting to give you the second quote, so I'll read this again. And when the feelings of service for your fellow men arise within your soul, do not stifle them. When the emotions of love for your neighbour well up within your heart, give expression to such urges of affection and intelligent ministry to the real needs of your fellows. And just one final quote for today, one that you probably all know very well. The consciousness of a victorious human life on earth is born of that creature faith which dares to challenge each recurring episode of existence when confronted with the awful spectacle of human limitations. By the unfailing declaration, even if I cannot do this, there lives in me one who can and will do it, a part of the Father Absolute of the universe of universes. And that is the victory which overcomes the world, even your faith. So fear not, have faith. That is the crux of the message. Without that faith, we will simply succumb to the bondage of fear again, because that's our animal nature. That's what we're prone to do. Jesus knew that, and he constantly encouraged his apostles to fear not, because I am with you. And Jesus is with us now in his Spirit, the Spirit of truth. The Father is with us through his Spirit, through daughter Justa. Our Mother is with us through the Holy Spirit. We are encapsulated, we are surrounded by Spirit, And if we have faith in that, we can experience it in our lives, and we can become a beacon of truth and light to others. So thank you for listening. I might just take this down, and how are we going for time? We've probably got 5-10 minutes for any comments or questions that people might have at all about the presentation. Feel free to do that. Ginny.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank
Just
you.
great. No question. It was super.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thanks.
Very pleased to hear that. Ah. Hello, Kim. Welcome.
Hello, Julian. Thank you so much. That was really terrific. I'm in the same country as you, so I'm feeling close to your message. It was very inspiring. Thank you. I picked up there the reference to time. So I can see that people who are able to transcend the current time thinking and perhaps be able to lift that to a much bigger vision, that, you know, things will change over time. I would imagine that time orientation is a powerful tool for getting through immediate, you know, fear reactions. Are you able to comment on that at all? Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. I think this is partly what attracts me to the Urantia book is the panorama of time it gives us. No other revelation I've come across can give us that long-term view of that cosmic view of our lives. That, as humans, we tend to get stuck in the present moment. Our present moment difficulties. We worry about our mortal lives. For some people, it's where my next crust of bread is going to come from. It's hard for them when you're on a mere survival level to think about cosmic issues. But as recipients of this revelation, we are in the box seat. We are in the most wonderfully advantageous situation to understand the outworking of God's will, the cosmic destiny that we face. And I think that's what Jesus meant. You know, why are you getting caught up on such, even things as pervasive as the coronavirus? Why are these things, why should they upset you? Why should they fill you with fear? Why should you feel trembling about your future when we already have eternal life? And it's almost as if God already sees us as being in paradise. We're already there. And so that's an encouraging thing for us, that we can recognize that even if I do die, I don't fear death, because I know it's just a transition. Nobody wants to get sick, but I know that I recently had to go through some treatment for cancer, and that was a sudden thing that happened. And I remember going into the operation, and I had no fear at all because I'd been praying. And I remember God's promise that he wouldn't take away these calamities, but he would promise to walk through them with us. And as I was laying on the operating table, I just remembered that promise that he was there with me at that time, and I really felt that. And I knew that whatever happened to me, I was safe in the Father's hands. So I hope that helps, those comments.
Yeah, it's lovely. Thank you. Very powerful thought. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for those comments coming through on the chat line. Much appreciated.
Julian, can you see the comment from Susan Hemmingson? It's an interesting question.
I'll just have a look at that again, Kathleen.
It starts, believe it or not.
Why don't you read it out, Susan?
I said, believe it or not, that this morning I was thinking about anxiety must be abandoned. The difficulties hardest to bear are those which never come. And I was wondering what you thought about this, Julian, not realising you were going to be presenting today, when it seems so many are anxious. And, you know, I often think about this motor, and I mean, is it manufactured? How do we get people to abandon it? I mean, I know some people are they seem naturally more anxious than others, and I'm quite fortunate in that I'm not, but I wonder if that's because I know about it or because I'm naturally not so anxious about things.
Yes, thanks, Susan. It's a good question, and it's probably one I'm particularly concerned about being a clinical psychologist. But, anxiety is all pervasive. It's a part of being human, of course, anxiety. It's when it becomes extreme or a burden to us that we suffer so much. And we have this animal mind that for millennia has been, using anxiety and fear as a way of surviving. So, unfortunately, when it's out of control, almost everything becomes a potential source of anxiety. The hardest things to bear are those which never come. Isn't that so true? We worry about things that end up never happening. The vast majority of things we worry about never end up happening, and yet we still do it. The antidote to that is faith and love, but as a psychologist, it's also being present in the superconsciousness. If we can identify with our soul, we'll effectively escape from the ravages of a out-of-control mind, in a sense, swapping the mind of Jesus for our own mind. Because the human mind is subject to those forces which at times seem almost impossible to control for some people. Certain people with certain personality types really do struggle with neurosis, anxiety, fears of all types, and yes, it can be quite a struggle for them. I, as a psychologist, I can't get into quoting the Urantia book, although I have subtle ways of doing it. But we certainly have a wonderful resource at our fingertips. We are very blessed to have the admonitions within the book that we are safe and that we don't need to worry about these trivial things that belong to the animal mind. Thanks, Susan, for that question.
My pleasure.
Yes, the word perspective is important, and really, I guess the Urantia book gives us that cosmic perspective, which is absolutely invaluable. I wonder what my life would be like without that cosmic perspective. Many religions believe in life after death, but their understanding is often quite blurry and indistinct and non-specific, and I've never come across anything like the Urantia book in terms of explaining things in such amazing detail, which gives you such cause for hope. Now, I've got about 5 minutes left, I think. Looking at my clock.
And
Kathleen.
Julian, when you mentioned before about, I can't remember how you said it, but anyway, basically what you're saying is that fear is a lack of faith. And I remember someone saying that to me years ago. Fear is a lack of faith, and even though it's all through the Urantia book, but just that little short statement has really made an impression on me. And I find if I feel overly anxious or fearful, I think, well, what does that say about my faith? So it's a bit of a yardstick for yourself. You know, you can check yourself and think, well, I'm being really fearful and anxious. Where's my faith? And it's a bit of a reminder, just go off and pray. Go and pray and have a worship session. You know, it's a good, that's a great antidote for retuning all of that. And Susan was asking about how do you abandon anxiety? Well, I think it's really about just keep refreshing that consciousness of your faith, and your and prayer and worship is brilliant for that.
That's a very useful comment. Thank you, Kathleen. I totally agree. I experience fear like anyone else, and sometimes my fears are about things that are really quite trivial. And hopefully my higher self, my personality jumps in and says, come on, if you're feeling frightened, there's something not quite right here, because I claim to have faith, but somehow my faith has been eclipsed by this animal fear. And you're right about needing to refresh that regularly, because it's not just something you had once and you've got it forever. You need to constantly be refreshing and reminding yourself of God's promises. And I overcome fear by going over God's promises again. and remind yourself that these things are true. I believe them, and that's why I can rise above fear. And I guess Jesus is the greatest example I have. His indomitable courage in the face of terrifying things. He was able to achieve what he did because of his faith in the Father's love, and that's what's needed, moment by moment, not just daily, but moment by moment. And I think this consciousness of God's presence, the book talks about the importance of being conscious of his presence all the time, that will enable us to overcome these fears and to be, to be fearless, to be soldiers of the kingdom in a powerful way through our example. Couple more minutes left.
Hi, my name is Robert Aponte from Stanton, Virginia.
Welcome, Robert.
And hi, I also adhere to another program, and I learned a long time ago a couple of acronyms which I'd like to leave you folks with. When I first got into another program, FEAR stood for F everything and run. And then, as I got a little more sober, because it was the Urantia book that got me sober 31 years ago, I found out that it was false evidence appearing real, that FEAR was a good acronym for. And then as I got further along, I found out that it was face everything and rejoice. And you overcome fear, because the opposite side of the coin, as the lady just pointed out, is faith. And the acronym for faith that I always found that comforted me was find all inspiration through him or her. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Robert. Acronyms are wonderful for remembering things, and they're brilliant. And that coincides with what we read about fear being a master fraud. It's false information.
Yep.
And so we need to be reminded that often my fears are based on false understanding, false information, ignorance, and so forth. I really appreciate you offering those to us today, Robert. Thank you. Bennett, welcome.
Thanks very much, Julian. Well, ruminating on this very problem many years ago, and I'm sure it's not something we do once in our life, but the idea that came to me was that the measure of your faith is the loss of your fear. I was thinking of it in terms of not being saved, but it really applies in such a broader spectrum. There's a lot of religious people that they don't quite get the faith thing. They've got the belief thing. But the faith thing sometimes eludes us, but it's an action, whereas fear is perhaps a lack of action.
Good comment. Thanks, Bennett. Much appreciated. Well, I realise that time is up. And I don't want... Sorry, Kathleen?
Just one more quickly. Philip raised his hand, I think the digital hand.
Oh, sorry, Philip. Can you hear me?
I can. I just wanted to make a comment. I think everybody should try skydiving. I did it, and I remember my experience was as we were climbing in the plane, I was petrified, I was scared, but I realised that the fear was never going to go away. And so what I did was I made a conscious decision to embrace the experience and to embrace that fear and to just experience what I was about to experience. And it was a very powerful thing that happened to me. And I realized a lot of times, I feel a lot of times for people who have anxiety issues, what they're giving up is they're giving up the power to choose, that they have the power to choose their response. You know, I can choose to be anxious here, or I can choose to be not anxious, you know. And so I think sometimes they abandon the responsibility and try to look for external circumstances or external stimulus that's causing this anxiety and this fear. Whereas if we can learn to look within and look, well, I'm choosing the response, you know, I think it's a powerful thing.
Good. Thanks, Philip. I agree. My mind tells me that fear of skydiving is a reasonable fear. But I know where you're coming from. Much appreciated. thanks everyone for listening so closely and for following along with me. I hope you could follow the slides because I missed a few here and there. But thank you, Ian, for your introduction, and I will now hand it back to you, I think. That's what's supposed to happen. All the best for the rest of the conference, everyone.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Julian.
Thanks, Julian.
Great to see everyone.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.